Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
In this thread, creepy experiences in the woods. I guess Greentext is cool, but I honestly prefer the way a story sounds when written properly. Anyway, I have a few to share. When I was a kid, we had an extensive forested area behind our house, which I used to explore. Not too far from the house, there was a huge husk of an old dead tree which had been uprooted, but the top was lodged in the canopy of the trees around it. I used to climb up and see how far I could go. One day it was very misty and dark, and as I climbed up, I heard a man call my name. I didn't know my father and just lived with my mother at the time, so I was curious to see who it was. But if I leaned over the dead tree to get a look, I ran the risk of falling off. He said my name again, and I told him I couldn't see him. He told me to stop being a scaredy cat and to lean over further so I could see his face. He kept repeating that if I saw his face, I would be very interested. He creeped me out. I said no, and he got angry. He said if I didn't jump out of the tree, I was easily high enough to at least badly injure myself. He would climb up and get me. I started crying, and thankfully my mother was outside in the garden and came to find me.
Still have nightmares about this. Grew up in a village called I Am in England, better known as the Plague Village. The village is surrounded by huge foothills and dense woodland. There is a particularly famous spot outside of the village down an old overgrown path that was named by the locals, the Death. This is where they would hold the funeral services for the plague victims during the outbreak. It's a huge, strangely shaped cave-like thing. When I was younger, me and all my friends were deathly afraid of this place. You would hear stories about floating vicars and ghosts that would follow you home. In the daytime, we would go down and explore the area surrounding it and find cow skulls on pikes littered about. One day, one of my school friends suggested we man up and go explore the Death. We all agree and go down at about 4 p.m. with a torch. We get there and only 2 of us will actually go inside the cave, me and my friend. 3 other of my friends wait outside. We go in, it feels terribly cold. I felt like I was being watched the whole time. We get to the end of the cave. It's not very deep. My friend finds a small crack that you can squeeze through. He starts to proceed down the narrow space with me following. All of a sudden he screams and runs at me. He drops the torch. I'm stuck in the entrance to the crack while he is trying to push his way past me in the complete darkness. We eventually got out and ran out of the cave. All other friends decided to bugger off and leave us. We practically run all the way home just as the sun sets. He is still crying as we reach his house. We didn't talk about what happened until the next day at school. He tells me he saw a white face smiling at him in that narrow crack and that it was coming towards him. Safe to say we never went down there again.
Right next to where I live, there's a small acre of land with pine trees on it. It's rectangular, about the size of a football field, and a ditch surrounds the whole thing, and like I said, lots of pine trees. On the other side lives an old guy whom I've seen perhaps 3 times the 17 years I've lived here. He's strange and keeps to himself, but he seems in no way like a grumpy old stubborn guy looking to seclude himself from society. So a few years back, our class needed some money to go on our class trip, and we decided to sell some cookies around our neighborhoods. But since I'm lazy and I waited till the last frickin' day to actually go out and knock on doors, I did it all day, and the last goddamn house I decided to go to is the old guy's house. It was getting late and dark out, but I needed only one more order of cookies to meet the minimum expectations. Had to sell like 8 boxes of cookies in total as a minimum. And to get to the old guy's house, you have to walk through that tiny patch of pine trees, barely worth calling a forest. So I did. Why not? I needed just one more order. But as I came to about the middle of the place, I heard some animal or something growl, and it creeped me out. And it didn't help that only seconds afterwards I saw a ripped off leg of a deer by the side of the trail. Basically the biggest nope moment in my life. I asked my mom about predators living around the neighborhood and she raised a brow. See, only thing around here that eats other animals are like foxes, and a fox couldn't kill a deer, at least not of that size. And foxes don't growl like that. I still have no idea what it was.
When I was about 10 years old, I had a nightmare about some big-ass, giant, disgusting fly following me around and bumping into me and getting me all dirty and disgusting. This fly was about the size of a medium-sized dog. Eventually I woke up, freaked out, and then laid in bed until I went back to sleep. The next day, I went to school, and at some point during the school day I went to the restroom, delivered a number 2, and proceeded to wash my hands. I was the only one in there that I know of. As I washed, I noticed a handful of little flies buzzing around nearby to my right. I stare at them for a couple seconds, think nothing of it, and dry my hands. Later I went home, did homework, then, just before dusk, went into the woods down the road from my house a little ways. I wandered a ways into the forest and just explored for a while before abruptly stumbling across the corpse of 2 dead rabbits, with what looked like fresh blood over stab or cut wounds. There was a swarm of flies around them, and I slowly began backing off. As I did so, a few of the flies flew straight at me and I swatted them away. I then turned around and started running back to my house, not because I was really afraid, just startled, and I wanted to tell my parents about it. As I ran, I heard this extremely annoying and loud buzzing sound coming closer from behind. I turned my head to look, and I swear I saw this massive swarm of flies around 20 feet behind me. I sprinted as fast as I could without looking back, and the buzzing sound slowly became fainter and fainter until I came within seeing distance of my parents' house. I didn't tell my parents about any of it. That night I went to sleep and had a dream about the same giant fly from my last dream. This time, in this dream, I was standing in the middle of the woods somewhere and saw it flying around over me near the treetops, circling around. I started running and it chased after me before I finally came upon a small clearing and a cave. In this clearing was a fire pit with fresh wood placed in it and a wooden stake in the ground. The fly flew past me overhead and landed on top of the stake, staring at me. After a couple moments, the wood in the fire pit burst into flames, and the fly flew into it, burning up and dying. At that moment, a man came out from the dark cave, holding a long 2-pronged fork, and impaled the burning corpse of the fly with it, and took it out of the fire. While it was still burning, he took a bite out of it and swallowed it without chewing. He turned to look at me, and his shadow cast by the fire grew larger and larger until it encompassed the whole area. The light from the fire didn't radiate beyond the flames themselves. The entire surrounding area was just as dark as the rest of the woods. At this moment I woke up, freaked out again. The next day after school, me and 2 friends go and explore the woods near my home again, and I take them to where I found the 2 dead rabbits, but they aren't there anymore. We wander a ways into the woods for what must have been at least an hour, trying to see if we could find a cave like the one in my dream. We never found one, and we went home just as it started getting darker. And now, whenever I see or hear a fly buzzing near me, I very nearly jump up out of paranoia.
Not exactly in the woods, but on a paved road next to a very densely wooded area. Me and my father, along with my sister, my father's girlfriend, and possibly her son, were walking down this very long paved road. I don't remember where it was, or why we were there, or where we were going. I just remember we were there. There was a parked bulldozer behind us, so there might have been construction happening around. We might have been at a campsite. Anyway, we were walking, and suddenly we came to a small break in the trees. The trees are right next to and parallel to the road, so it's very noticeable. There were a few small trees blocking the way, but you could still look in. We stop and look in, and there's a small pond or swamp-like area right there, right next to the road. In the pond is the body of a biker, face down, bike in the pond, helmet still on. He was wearing a yellow dress shirt-like shirt and jeans, and his skin was purple and bloated. We just kept walking. No one said anything, and I don't think it was ever reported.
Hot smoggy summer, southern Ontario. Drinking and smoking in a forest late at night around 1 or 2 in the morning, with my friend and 3 girls we had started seeing. The forest runs down a small dirt trail surrounded on both sides by countless trees and steep hills. A forest filled with small creeks, old bridges. Suddenly all 5 of us hear and acknowledge an extremely loud, strong, shrill shrieking echoing from the very end of the forest that has a culvert for large animal crossing below the only road above. Very steep hills on either side of the road. Now we don't see the culvert or road as it is hundreds of yards down through the winding pitch-black, faintly moonlit forest. Keep in mind we only just started to drink, so our mind frame isn't in question, and I'm a zoology major that has extensive knowledge in native animals. This noise piercing our eardrums is like nothing I've ever heard before or since. If you can imagine, it is a mixture of a rabbit screaming as it is being attacked, ripped apart, and killed, and a very clear blood-curdling human voice, that of a woman being murdered screaming for her life. We all immediately think this has to be a person. Girls are terrified, me and my buddy feeling creeped yet protective, drinking liquid courage start down the path to investigate with a flashlight as the girls hang back around 30 yards behind us huddled together. Noise continues as we near a bridge before a bend in the trail. I start yelling, stupidly, to warn or ward off those, or it, with our impending arrival. This obviously caused a commotion with those friends of mine not wanting to push it or travel further. My buddy at the time is a 6'3", 200-pound man-child. We are both very bold young strong kids, but he is holding me back because this sound and situation feels really wrong. All of a sudden the noise stops completely due to my boisterous announcement or our group's advancement. The forest is eerily quiet. The girls behind us decide it is far too much to handle and start to book it in the opposite direction back down the trail to the only desolate path up a steep dirt hill. Me and my friend freeze in our tracks, waiting, watching, listening for any more commotion or sound. All of a sudden down the trail bounding towards us just outside of our flashlight's reach. With full yellowish red reflective lenses in its eyes glaring from at the very least over 6 feet high from the ground, comes a dark shadowy creature, running towards a group of loud. Multiple people down a lone dirt road. Heading directly towards us at a very strong pace. We are noping out of there and not looking back. Running in the opposite direction. Following the girls' vapor trails, nope off all the way up into the main roads and home. Now deer is the only remotely large animal with reflective lenses around these parts, and these deer do not kill other animals, do not nearly reach 6 feet in height and do not run towards groups of brash overconfident people in a forest down a wide open coverless trail at night when their vision and senses are heightened so they can avoid people like us. The girls no longer come around, we no longer go into that forest at night.
Not a personal story, but one from my uncle as a kid who lived near Native American reservations about 50 years ago. He grew up to be a cop and is pretty reliable. He claimed to have gone with a friend of his into the woods where they planned to jump out and scare a classmate that they took a liking to tormenting. Must have been around 10 years of age at the time. They promptly took shelter behind a log along the path and waited for a few minutes for the poor chap to come shambling through. Soon enough, what he described as a little Indian, about 3 or 4 feet tall, slowly walked down the path. At the closest point along the path, this little man paused to temporarily glare in their direction as they stared cautiously, and after a few moments, he resumed his trek. All that was left was, "We got out and never told a soul." He told this while sitting around a campfire at a party about a year ago, never speaking of it in all these years prior.
We first moved to this house when I was 3. It's a nice house on about 20 acres of hills and a few trees. Not terribly wooded, but there still are trees loosely covering the hills. Wouldn't call it a suburb, but I wouldn't call it rural either. Anyways, to the northeast of my house is a little hill that is slightly higher than the hill my house is on. It's covered with a few trees, but in the center more or less rests an old oak that I now call the old man in the tree. Why do I call it this? Because when I first looked at it in the night it appeared that there was some figure leaning up in the tree, against one of the main branches of the tree where the main root splits off into the main branches. I can tell that it's old using some simple logic. The tree has some burn marks on it, though it looks like it's healed mostly, but there has never been a fire while the house was here. The house itself was only used by one family before us. There is an old animal pen on my property that has decayed for the most part, but some of the metal wire and the burned pen stakes are left. So I estimate the tree to be a good 60 or more years. Now as for the figure, I soon figured out that it was just a limb that stopped growing, so that way with the lights of the town in the background allows it to form a silhouette which makes it appear that there is someone leaning up in the tree. Course, if you stared at it long enough it looks like he moves or turns towards you. Course, I was still young and never wanted to go near that thing. It didn't help that when my favorite cat was torn apart by the local coyotes, my mother gave it a form of Indian burial in the tree. In this kind of burial you put the few remains in a small fur pouch and hang it from a tree. So one year when I was in middle school, me and my friend were hanging out at my house one night when I told him about the tree. He finds the story interesting, so I go to the edge of my property where you can see him, just sitting in the tree. He's creeped out, but that only makes him more interested in him, so we go up to the tree. To top off the eerie setting factor, there is a rope hanging from the tree. The family before us had a swing up there, but it had since fallen off and only the rope remained. So as we got up there we started to mess around, like the stupid middle schoolers we were. Hey, isn't this how cults are created and stuff? Yeah, they start worshipping random things like rocks and leaves. Hey dude, old man in the tree, I give my soul to thee. Ha, I can do one better, old man in the tree, I shall forever worship thee. It continued on like that until I said this line. Old man in the tree, I give my blood to thee. And as if it was some cheesy horror movie, my finger started bleeding, and by bleeding I meant blood covering my hand. The strange part was that I didn't feel any pain whatsoever. So as you would expect, we got out of there as fast as possible, screaming holy shit all the way down. When I got to my house and washed off the cut, I noticed something strange. The cut that made my hand bleed wasn't exactly a cut, it was a paper cut. A tiny little scratch. There is no way that a little cut like that would be able to cover my hand with blood. I'm not a hema or anything, and I know I didn't open an artery. The next day we went and checked. Sure enough, it wasn't a hallucination. There was dried blood on the leaves and the root of the tree.
I live in the Midwest of the U.S. I haven't heard many stories from around here, but I've had plenty of experiences. I've seen logs break and branches snap for no reason, usually when you're about to go near them. I've heard yelling and screaming from my porch at 3 in the morning, and I live on 350 acres of private property in the middle of nowhere. I've had cars with strange people in them pull up alongside the road to my house and just sit there watching for hours on end. But the one thing that really freaked me out happened to me when I was a little kid. My family has owned the property I live on since my grandpa was a little kid. We're farmers. Naturally, we know about every bit of land we own, from where the creeks start to where the trees end. As a kid, I would spend my free time exploring our property, getting to know the land, going to the far edges of our fields. And by the time I was 10, it was impossible for me to get lost. Well, one day when I was walking around with my dog, we were on the far end of my property. I heard a rustling in the bushes next to me, about 20 feet away. I thought nothing of it, making it out to be a rabbit or some other critter. But my dog, she froze on the spot and started growling at this bush. Now I know my dog, and I know the wildlife that lives on my property. So I start to think that maybe there's a copperhead, a poisonous snake, under the bush, because that's the only thing that scares my dog. I start walking over to the bush, which isn't moving anymore, to kill the snake or whatever the hell was scaring my dog like that. And I hear more leaves rustling, this time from both my sides. My dog's going bonkers by this time, and she runs off yelping back the way we came, which was the first thing that made me think something was seriously wrong. This is where things got paranormal. Things started going dark, like night was coming on early, and the wind really picked up and started whipping the trees around me. I got a feeling of danger. Everything seemed very threatening, so I got the hell out of there. I remember while I was running away from that spot, warmth seemed to spread back into the world, like something had been blocking the sun, but moved. I ran however far it was back to my house, and found my dog was inside with my parents, acting normal like nothing had happened. I have no idea what happened that day, but I've been back to that spot since, and nothing like that has happened again. I guess I should mention that my kids are scared to go walking around alone outside too.
Camping with friends out in the forests around our town. 9 p.m., full moon. Friend brought his dog with him and was sleeping by the fire. He suddenly wakes up and starts barking. We all grab the nearest weapon. Gun laws in Australia, so this consists of shovels, machetes, knives, etc., because the place is notorious for illegal shroom farmers who are very inhospitable. Sitting around, waiting for the dog to go back to sleep. He did. Wakes up again half an hour later, barks some more. We get our knives again. False alarm. An hour later, he does it yet again. Nobody bothers to pick up anything, keep chatting. Moon got covered by clouds, everything went a bit darker, so we all looked for some lamps to fire up. Dog keeps barking. Keep telling him to shut up. Finally shuts up as we get the lamps set up, but sits still, watching the little dirt road near our campsite. We sit down. The dog's owner was watching the dog carefully. We continue chatting when the dog owner suddenly tells us to be quiet. We all shut up and listen. Footsteps. Someone grabbed a floodlight and shone it up the road. Nothing. Footsteps stop, though they were very faint. Not all of us heard it. Turn the light off. Nothing. Weird. Start chatting again. Footsteps come back. I heard them first this time. Bam! Floodlight back down the road. Nothing. Half of us are laughing, calling us paranoid. I'm creeped out now, so a few of us walk a little down the road to check it out. Absolutely nothing. Sit back down, keep talking. Barely 10 seconds before we heard, all of us, something running towards us, then a scraping noise in the gravel and dirt. Then the footsteps sounded like they were running off back down the road. We were scared, grabbed weapons, and shined the light back down the road. Nothing. Nope. All of us went to bed. We all still talk about it.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.